Hello and welcome to 7 Days of Halloween. Hi everyone, it's Monica and welcome to day 1 of my 7 Days of Halloween series. We're going to start off with a bang using one of the latest releases from Tim Holtz Halloween release, and this is one of the 3D texture fades. We all know this one. This is one that we've seen out in social media, and tons of people are using this texture fade. Now, if you're not familiar with texture fades, this is basically embossing powder or embossing folders on steroids, because these embossing folders are deep, they've got lots of crevices, and they make great projects. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, as you can see from my finished card, I've already been playing with this texture fade. I wanted to get a feel for it before I actually got on camera and started creating for you. But for this second card, we're going to be using not only the 3D texture fade, but also one of the mica stains. And this is the Iron Gate. I wanted to see how it would look if I sprayed the 3D texture fade before I actually embossed it. And as you can see, it came out with some really great background. It got into all of those crevices and it created a nice starting point. I also decided I wanted to try to make a card using not only the texture fade, but one of the Sizzix Thinlits that came out a few years ago. And these, of course, are the claw marks, and these claw marks are awesome. I actually have had this die set for a while, but I've never used it, so I thought it was about time that I do that this Halloween season. So before I started working on this panel, I wanted to make sure it was dry, so I did take my heating tool and I added some heat to it just to make sure it was dry, because I wanted to go ahead and start using some of my foundry waxes. Now, the first card that I created, I used a sterling foundry wax, and that gave me the more of a silver tint, but I wanted to have more of a copper tint this time. So this time I was using the foundry wax called Mind, and this is more of the reddish one, but really once it's said and done, it's more of a copper look. Now, the foundry waxes came out earlier in the year, and if you haven't had a chance to play with them, what these essentially do is they give you kind of a wax cover. So it's kind of a unique product, because you would think that it's liquid, but once you're done with it, it really is somewhat powdery. You want to make sure that when you are working with this, you don't have any of your heat tools going on, because it could dry out the foundry wax within your actual bottle. So here I'm just taking a small paintbrush, I'm putting some of that foundry wax directly on my paper, and I'm just kind of brushing it in. I don't really have any rhyme or reason, I just want to make sure that I get some coverage on those skeleton faces. And there's lots of ways that you can use these foundry waxes. As you can see here, I am using my finger to kind of move the liquid into the crevices, but then I'm also going back to my paintbrush just to get a good coverage. And as you can see, as I add the Mind foundry wax, it really is creating some nice color and a good contrast to my background. Now, like I said, on my first card, I had used the foundry wax called Sterling, and this one is called Mind. There are 2 other foundry waxes as well. One of them is called Gilded, and that's more of a gold look. And then one of them is called Statue, which is more of a bronze look. All 4 of these foundry waxes are pretty awesome, and if you haven't tried them yet, I highly recommend it. And then once I had all of the coverage that I wanted, I made sure to put my cap back onto my bottle, because I didn't want it to get too close to my heat, and I put it aside. Then I got my heating tool and I took the heat directly to my cardstock, right over where I had put the foundry wax coverage, because once you heat this up, it does turn into kind of a waxy look. So I wanted to make sure that it became really vibrant, and I heated it up nicely to get that effect. Now, once I had it dry, I wanted to go ahead and trim it down, because I was going to make a 5x7 card. But as you can see, when I ran this piece of paper through my Big Shot, I had some edges that weren't part of the embossed image. Now, the paper that I did use was watercolor cardstock, and it is a pretty thick cardstock. I would recommend when you are using your 3D texture fades, you do use a somewhat thick paper because you want to make sure that there is enough texture in your paper to be able to grab on and not tear your paper. And then I'm going to go ahead and trim down the edges. Now, like I said, I am going to make a 5x7 card. So when I trim this down, I am going to be matting it to bring out some of the extra colors. I believe I end up using 2 additional pieces of paper to mat it, but we'll come to that in just a minute. What I would recommend is just trim it down to get rid of the white edges, the part that didn't get embossed, and that should be good enough. Now remember, this is thicker paper, and now you have the embossed image on it. So it might be a little bit difficult to cut through your paper, so kind of keep that in mind. You want to make sure that your trimmer is nice and sharp, and that you do have a trimmer that can go through some thick paper. All right, now I want to go ahead and add some shadowing to the sides of the card. And to do this, I'm going to use my Black Soot Distress Oxide. Now, really, you can use Distress Oxide or just Distress Ink. Either one would be fine. I happen to have the Distress Oxide on my table, so that's what I grabbed for. And as you can see, I'm just creating kind of a shadowy effect around the edges just to highlight the images a little bit more. When you have darker edges, it tends to give you more of a focal point on the image inside of the black, and that's really what I'm trying to do here. And then once I'm finished with the black soot, I'm going to go ahead and grab some of that red fired brick that's sitting next to me. This is a Distress Ink, and I'm just lightly adding some of this red ink over the images. Remember, these images are really embossed. They're really standing high up on your card. So just a little swipe will bring out some of that color. And again, this is a Halloween card, so I just wanted to add a little bit more gore to it. Now, really, for the most part, the surface of this card is finished. The 3D embossing folder really did all of the work for you. It was just a matter of adding some color combinations to bring out those skeletons. So now I'm going to go ahead and mat my 3D element right onto my cardstock. And first I'm going to come in with some black just to frame my card. I'm just adding some of my 3-in-1 beacon glue, which is my favorite glue. And I'm going to go ahead and add it straight to some silver cardstock. And then I'm going to take my 3D image and I'm going to add that directly to the black cardstock. Now, whenever I'm working with thicker paper, and this is really thick paper because not only am I having 2 layers, but I also have this watercolor paper, which if you've used watercolor paper before, you know it's pretty thick. But whenever I'm working with thicker paper and I have a couple of layers, I always like to add some brads. And this just really helps to keep the integrity of the card together. I don't want my layers coming up. I want to make sure that they do stay intact. And even though I am using a good amount of glue, the possibility with layers still is there to have your layers separate. So I always come in with brads. It's just something I tend to do, and I really like the results that I get when I do that. So once I had the brads attached, now it was time to figure out what I was going to do for a sentiment. Now on the very first card, I have some really cool washi tape that says trick or treat, and I used that to go over the silver skeletons, and that really stood out nicely. But I didn't necessarily want to do the exact same sentiment. So I remembered that I still had some of those those word chips that Tim Holtz came out with several years ago. And I hate the fact that he doesn't have them in the big packaging anymore. He does have them in some of his smaller ephemera pieces, some of the chipboards, but you just don't get the full set that you used to. In one of my next videos, I'm going to show you how I create my own, but that's for another video. But for this particular one, I wanted to go ahead and add something that I thought would be appropriate for this type of a card. Now, I know everybody isn't into the creepy cards, but really, I love making these Halloween cards. It's my one time of the year where I can get really kind of creepy, I guess, and bring out some of the macabre in me. But I love creating some of these old type, vintagey type of scary cards, and it really is one of my favorite types of cards to create. So I love Halloween season. But in any case, I wanted to go ahead and use a sentiment that I thought would be appropriate. So I dug into my word chips, and I pulled out Dearly Departed, and I thought this was perfect, right? I mean, you've got these skeletons coming up. I really think also something like The Walking Dead would be really cool as well. I might have to create some words that say The Rise of the Walking Dead or something like that, because I think that would be really cool as well. But for this particular card, I went ahead and I stuck with Dearly Departed. And then I wanted to go ahead and add a little bit of Distress Stain. I'm using Festive Berries because Festive Berries makes the best blood, and it goes nicely onto these chipboards. And once it dries, it looks like it's just like smeared blood. So that finishes that card. So let's go ahead and create another one. I had the idea of using those claws on these skeleton faces, and I know that there's not a lot of surface, but I wanted to go ahead and give it a try, just again because I haven't used this die yet, and I thought it would be kind of cool to see claws scraping through these skeleton faces. Now this is going to be a smaller card. This is going to be an A2 card, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm just trimming down some of this paper first of all before I start to add some color to it, just so I can get the right measurements. Now this card is going to go together relatively quickly, so I want to make sure that I do explain how my 7 Days of Halloween series is going to work. So at the end of the series, I am going to be doing a drawing, and in order to qualify for the drawing, you're going to want to go ahead and leave a comment on every single one of the videos. This is going to be a series that will go for the whole week, so you're going to get a video every single day, and I really hope that you come back every day and watch my series. I think these cards are really fun to create, and I hope that you enjoy them as much as I do. Now, once you leave a comment on my video, I'm also going to have a link where you're going to actually enter your name into a drawing. And I'll have a drawing at the end of the series, probably about a week after the series ends. I'll have a drawing that I'll also post up on YouTube as well. So if you've enjoyed my video, don't forget at the end of the video to leave a thumbs up, and to be entered into the drawing, you're going to want to not only leave a comment, but click on the button as well, so that way I grab your name and your email for my drawing. All right, so back to my final card here. As you can see, this is a really simple card. I just grabbed some of my Black Soot Distress Oxide, and I'm just lightly rubbing it over the paper. It's picking it up really nicely, and it really makes a great contrast between the white and the black, so it really stands out. And then once I have my area cleaned up here on my media mat, I'm going to go ahead and take a heating tool to it. I wanted to make sure all of the ink was relatively dry before I started adding the distress stain to the claw marks. Now remember, the claw marks are supposed to be some sort of an animal that clawed through maybe a wall or a face in this instance. So I wanted to make sure I had some blood actually from the claws as well. And again, I'm going to be using my distress stain called Festive Berries. Now I really wanted the blood just to be around the claw marks. So I knew it was going to get a little bit messy here because I had those open parts of the claw. So I went ahead and I grabbed some paper towels, and then I started adding the distress stain right over the claw marks. And most of it did seep through because I do obviously have an open space, but I was able to get some of the edges of the claw saturated in some of that red distress stain to give it that extra look that I was looking for. Now you can see my distress stain actually has the dauber on the top of it, and I don't think that they come like this anymore. I think they come in just the sprays. These were discontinued some time ago, but I was able to stock up when they were getting discontinued, and I still have the ones with the daubers, which work great for me. So once I had all of the distress stain where I wanted it, I went ahead and took my heating tool to be able to dry it, so that way I wouldn't have any more smearing. Now, if you don't have any distress stain, I think if you probably just took some of your distress inks or your distress oxides and just kind of wet them down and get a paintbrush and just kind of brush them over the claws, I think that probably would give you the look as pretty much what I'm going for here as well. All right, so now that I have my claw marks all dried, I'm going to go ahead and add my base to that gray cardstock. Now for the cardstock, you could probably use black as well. I went ahead and I went with the gray just because I didn't want it to be too dramatic in the background. You could also have images in the background as well, but I went ahead and just kept mine really plain. And as you can see here, I started to consider adding the foundry waxes, and then I decided I would go ahead and just leave it with the more of a muted look versus that shiny look that the foundry waxes would have given me. And then at that point, it was just a matter of gluing down my panel and adding my sentiment. And again, for the sentiment, I went for one of my chipboards, and I had one called Wicked, which you're going to be seeing here in just a moment. It was a smaller chipboard, and it fit well on my A2 size card, so that's what I went for. So I'm going to go ahead and finish gluing down my panel, and then I will add my sentiment with some of my glue, and then once again I will add some of that distress stain to the sentiment, the chipboard, to make it look a little bit bloody. And that's going to do it for my cards. I hope that you've enjoyed my very first day of my 7 Days of Halloween series. And remember, I'm going to be back every day this week, so make sure that you are subscribed to my channel and that you do have the bell clicked, so that way when the new video is uploaded, you will be notified. All right, everybody, I hope you enjoyed my very first cards of my 7 Days of Halloween, and we'll see you again tomorrow.